Hi, my name is Kai Chang. I'm the host of Q Conversations, interviews and conversations with Quora writers. My guest today is Diane Meriwether, and we just actually had an open house at the Quora headquarters, and we actually met in person for the first time. So, hi, Diane, welcome.
Hi, Kai.
And for those who are unfamiliar with your writing, tell us about you, first of all.
Well, I live in San Diego, California, and I'm just thrilled to be up here for the meetup. I work with people who are trying to change their lives. So my real interest is in transformation and what it takes, what it's like just the moment before people change. And that's led me down some really interesting paths. Currently, I work with people who are court mandated, people who the judge feels could do better if they talk to somebody, and I'm the somebody that they often talk to.
So you get a lot of resistance, I imagine, from people
Absolutely,
sometimes.
I love it.
And so being able to kind of get past that. I imagine, what's been some case of turnarounds for you in terms of professionally being able to have a story of someone who obviously didn't want to see you, just pushed back tremendously, and maybe in your head you're even thinking like, I'm gonna write this person out. There's no way. Do you even do that actually? Maybe I'm projecting. I don't know. I mean, I sometimes feel like if I can't reach somebody, I'm like, I'm gonna write this person off. Do you ever get to that point?
You know, very rarely. Occasionally I'll have somebody who makes me absolutely at my wit's end, and I'll spend time talking to my colleagues and everybody else saying, you know, I just don't know what to do with this guy.
Right.
You know, one thing I always know is and it's kind of a mantra, is you have to know me better to hate me this much. So I don't take it personally as they don't know me.
Because it's what you represent, not necessarily
Precisely.
who you are as a person.
Exactly. What really is useful in my work is that we do this in group settings. So I have 15 people and it's a staggered entry. So someone will come in the door and they're full of excuses or anger or, resentment and, you're not the boss of me. And they'll sit with people who have kind of learned to appreciate the process. And so it's almost like the dog park. Like a dog comes into the dog park and they look around to see what everybody else is doing.
Right. And they can see different progressions of people from fully resistant to kind of taking full advantage of it and all the gradations in between.
Exactly.
Ah.
Yeah.
And how did you come across, we touched on this earlier in conversation, how did you discover Quora initially and what got you into that community?
I'm a reader, and I had an aggregate site that had all these different other sites on it, and Quora was one of the ones that came across. There was an article that I read about something that I wasn't interested in, but it was so well written and it was so deep that I thought to myself, I have to read more of this. And then at the bottom of it, it said, read more. And I was like, whoa, this person is a writer. This is a thing. And the deeper I went, the more interesting people were. It took me about 8 months to figure out that Quora was not just on my newsfeed. I'm a little slow sometimes. On the internet, I went there and read more. And again, completely gobsmacked that these great writers were out there, that these experiences. And I finally worked up a bunch of courage and I wrote my first answer. And, people were kind. Somebody upvoted me.
Ah.
I know.
You discover later on that not everybody is kind. It's an imperfect process. But fortunately, your first experience was relatively positive.
Well, I didn't understand that there were downvotes.
Yes. It's kind of hidden from people. So
yeah, that was helpful.
And you discover that there is sort of a seamy, especially if you tread into certain territories that trigger certain kinds of responses, emotionally volatile topics with strongly dissenting opinions. So you wrote your first entry, and I know we mentioned that the first one you were okay with. What were some of the stuff that has gotten you more footage, more traffic, more interest, more discussions?
Well, the first answer I did that anybody paid attention to, or that a lot of people paid attention to, enough to make me feel like, wow, people are reading me, people are viewing me, people are doing stuff, was about a dog I had.
Yes.
And what I learned from him, I'd been afraid of dogs as a kid. I had seriously bit when I was a young woman, and so I'd always been afraid of dogs, but I wanted a Newfoundland. I thought, they're so big, they look like teddy bears. How bad could it be? I bought a Newfoundland, and when he was about 5 years old, I realized that I'd fallen completely in love with this animal, that he was, my constant companion, and that Newfoundlands only live 10 years. And I thought to myself, I can't do this. I felt like I was like climbing a little tiny ladder and going to jump into a paper cup. When he died, there was no way I was going to survive this. And so I wrote about distancing myself. I wrote about deciding that I was going to save myself by getting myself under control. And well, he taught me in his big, goofy, boundary violating doggy ways that I wasn't going to be able to, that I was going to be devastated when he died. And the only thing that I could do in the meantime was to not be joyful, you know. And it was a huge epiphany.
You mentioned previously in a conversation that the idea that what was the mantra, that tragedy should catch you. Was it?
May all your tragedies catch you by surprise.
I really like that. It really resonated.
Thanks.
The idea that we see people, they live in fear their entire lives, just cringing, waiting for some bad news to strike them because they've either been conditioned to believe that way, they've grew up in a very toxic, hostile environment, and that's just the reality they're familiar with. I mean, we talked about the idea of pain versus and empathy versus compassion. So I wanted to hear more about that, actually. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to add, though, before we go on, that my second mantra is Mark Twain's "I've been through many terrible things, a couple of which actually happened." So I haven't got this whole suffering thing down completely.
A lot of it is in our own heads. I totally agree.
But I am, you know, if I had something that I could give to people, box up and give and put out in the world, it would be learning how to resonate on a compassionate level instead of simply empathetic.
And so what's the definition between the two? This is something I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into. Go ahead.
So if we look at discomfort or suffering as a scale, there's two ways to really experience discomfort, and one is sort of numeric. So you can say that something minor happens to you and it's a 3 on the scale of perhaps 10,000. Something kind of moderate happens, you know, it's 100, and then you have something terrible. Like for me, the example is the preventable death of your child. Right. And that's 10,000.
Right.
And so we walk around in the world and when we see our friends or people we care about having these suffering experiences, and they tell us what happened to them. And so a prom queen tells you, "I broke my nail." And I look at that and I'm like, yeah, it's about a 4, sweetie, you know, and frankly, 4 doesn't even hit on my own registry. 4, get over it, is what I tend to say, because empathy says, how big is your suffering?
Right.
And if I think it's worthy, I'm going to internalize my own feeling, how I would feel if that happened to me, and then I'm going to give you support.
Right.
But there's a minimum to that.
Right.
And there's also a maximum.
Right.
So if I have a capacity of 500 and you come to me with 1,000 of suffering, something really horrific, you're a refugee and you saw your child die on a boat. I mean, if there's horrific suffering.
Beyond your own experiences, capacity.
Beyond my capacity.
Right.
What I tend to do at that point is, instead of being able to empathize, I can't. I distance myself. And the word that we use for that is pity.
Right.
And pity says to me, I don't even know what you're going through. I can't imagine this, and I'm just really glad it's not me.
Right.
And so nobody wants pity. There's people running around the world say, I don't want to be pitied.
Right.
Because it's a distance. I am alone now in my suffering, and I can see in your eyes that it's more than it should be.
Right.
So empathy allows us to resonate with people who, 1, hit a minimum threshold, and 2, don't exceed our maximum.
Right.
But see, compassion doesn't have that limit, because compassion's a ratio. How filled with suffering are you?
Relative to what
your own capacity
right.
is. And I can always fill myself to a similar depth or percentage and resonate with you.
Right.
So when I run into a little girl who's broken her nail, I take a look at her and I say, oh my gosh, you're at 85%.
Right.
And now for me, 85% would be, you know, California Falls in the ocean. I don't know, whatever it is. But I can sit with her and go, oh yeah, that's a keening sorrow. Oh, that feels like all the hopes. All the hopes are gone.
Right.
And so I can resonate with her and allow her to let that 4 deepen her to 5.
Right.
You know, and then she has a deeper capacity. So the benefit of that is, as I'm doing that, filled to my 85%, I'm actually suffering the world. You know, I'm suffering with the world.
Right.
And that's digging me to 90.
Right.
To deeper.
Raising your own capacity to relate to people of different levels of privilege and suffering and lack of privilege. Right.
And deepening my numeric amount.
Right.
So that you know, because I think we're as deep as the suffering we've suffered. You know, so if I was 500 when I sat down with her, I spent 80%. Now I'm 501.
Right.
You know, and I'm getting a little bit deeper. And I think that when they talk about those characters, the great spiritual teachers who talk about all being one, or who face death or torture with equanimity.
Right.
What's happening for them is that they've been resonating with the world for so long that they're so deep that their own suffering is almost negligible to them. They never personally get above 3 or 4%.
Right.
Right. Although they often are sitting down next to prom queens resonating at 90%.
In that capacity, I remembered
Right.
reading the biography. When recently Nelson Mandela passed away, it was fascinating. If you think about this guy's biography, that when they put him in prison, the expectation was, you're going to die in here. You're going to go in a young man, and you're going to die inside these walls. You had no reason to be gracious. You could be angry, pick fights with guards, join a gang. And many people do. They surrender to despair. That's because what's there to live for at this point? And yet, of course, he wrote letters. Was a leader to whatever extent you can be inside a prison cell. And miracle of miracles, emerged from a prison cell 20 some odd years later, and
Deep.
became president
Yeah.
of the country that imprisoned you.
Yeah.
Which was, that to me was, it's something I can't really quite wrap my head around, because it's just like I can think about just the how much anger almost all of us would feel. How dare you,
Yeah.
And now it's like I'd like to live for anywhere. I may as well just be this ball of hatred and anger, lash out at whoever is a nearby easy target. You're wearing a uniform, you're the enemy. I'll cram my fist down your throat, I'll make a shank, I'll kill you, whatever we're going to do. Throw me in jail again?
Right. Already the worst has happened. Why not be the worst?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'll live up to your low expectation of me.
Right.
And he didn't.
And he didn't.
And the world was blessed with
Yeah.
the rest of his life, even though we did lose 20 some odd years. But maybe that 20 some odd years was necessary to make him what he was, which is kind of a horrible thing to say, but
Well, I don't think there's another option to really sit with that. I mean, what else can you say?
Right.
It should have been, but it was.
Right.
And then you get in that kind of a loop of it can't be, but it is.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that to me was interesting, just from a purely like sort of a living example, because you hear historic stories of people, and it's hard to kind of necessarily connect with that. But here's a living person who actually went through this in our lifetime, dealt with
And made those choices.
and made those choices, and
Yeah.
was able to handle himself with a level of graciousness. And so, and I wonder, like, what kind of lessons we can learn as private citizens, as people, because I feel like right now, the thing that I worry most about looking in is, I think we're becoming more and more isolated in our own little silos. We have little solipsistic, whether it's politically, we just surround people with that think exactly like us, whether it's online communities. It used to be we live in a tribe of a couple hundred people, you have to deal with everybody. The person with the low IQ, that's well-meaning, the kind of obnoxious drunk. We all are part of the same little community, and we just have to learn to get along with each other. Now, you don't vote exactly the same way? I don't even see you. I'm going
I've
to delete
got
you off my
65
Facebook.
other people I can be with.
Exactly. I've got lots of choices, and I don't need to hang out with your kind of people. And so I feel like in an interconnected age, we're actually becoming more polarized, more judgmental, while making sort of superficial nods to, look at the way we talk about the other side, whether those flyover country people and then people within looking at those coastal elites, the kind of language we use is more combative, more confrontational.
I think it's sort of one of those as above, so below. I think that we can look at our responses to people who we disagree with.
Right.
And how much civility we bring to that, or how much we're using a disagreement to externalize our own darkness.
Right.
So even on the micro, I think one of my big concerns right now is people who are trying to find a designated bad guy.
Right.
So that they can perpetrate on them.
Right.
And there's this perpetration energy that we get into where we really want to externalize our suffering. It's too painful. I'm too unsupported to feel this. So I want to give it to you. Here, have my suffering.
Right.
And we'll do that by me attacking you.
Right.
And I will literally give you suffering.
Right.
And because I've been socialized to know that I'm not supposed to do that to good people, Mommy told me no,
Right.
I have to find a villain.
Right.
I have to make him bad enough. And then I'm going to be able to go ahead and hand him my suffering.
Right.
And one of my heartbreaks right now is how much of that happens with people that I really admire. That we look for the target, and then we perpetrate on the perpetrator.
Right.
And my goal is to say, clean up inside. For me, I always ask, please, Diane, clean up inside.
Right.
And suffer your own stuff.
Right.
Suffer. When I see somebody who's egregious, where am I egregious? When I see somebody who's racist, where am I racist? When I see somebody who's exclusive, where am I exclusive?
Right.
And that work I can do.
It's completely within your control, as opposed to this sort of helpless feeling of society is we just need to exterminate those kinds of
The
people.
bad people. And not only that, but that actual act deepens me because I have to suffer. I have to say to myself, there's a conflict between the wonderful, loving, spiritual Diane that I'd like to pretend that I am, or that I like to hope that I am, and the kind of gritty little monster who wants to bite the neck of somebody who annoys me.
Right.
You know, and who says, well, yes, I'm kind to everyone, but not that guy.
Right.
So that's what I have to look at inside, and that suffering deepens me. It makes me more compassionate.
We touched on this earlier as well, this idea that sometimes the hard part is sometimes when you're doing all this work and you're dealing largely in a world that's indifferent to that kind of effort. They're in their own world, they're solipsistically focused on, and it's hard. You feel like you're doing the work of two people. You're trying to empathize. You're like, they're not even meeting you halfway. They're not even meeting you a third of the way. You're doing like 99.9% of the work. And sometimes it's hard to not feel frustrated, not to feel like, you ungrateful turd. How do you not get that I'm doing all this work and you're doing none of it?
I think the possibility here is to understand that the gift is to do the compassion work, so that I'm actually feeding at this table while I'm opening a vein to you.
Right.
I'm feeding. I'm actually being fed.
Right.
And sadly, you're not able to feed at this table yet.
Right.
And so instead of saying you're taking from me, you're draining me,
right.
as if I had some sort of maximum capacity for, and sometimes I do, then this is quite true, but as if there was some overall, I'm going to reach this limit and then there'll be less of this in the world,
right.
less kindness in the world, less compassion, because we're going to give it all to you. And so I need to hoard it.
Right.
You know, and if to flip that and say, okay, so I'm getting an opportunity to work in this world, to live in this world, to exercise this. And let's see how much I can give you. Let's see how undefended I can be. Let's see how transparent I can be. With the compassion for myself that, okay, that's it. That's it.
We've hit my limit.
Yeah,
sometimes we do.
And that's okay.
Because I remember, I mean, I was on there's a modern version of a spin on an old thing called, you remember Post-Secret?
Yes.
These postcards, these secret confessions, some really dark stuff, like, everyone who knew me before 9/11 thinks I'm dead. All these like, whoa, right? And recently there's like a social media version of it where people can post secrets, and it's online. There's like an interactive element. You can see secrets of your friends and friends of friends. And I came across one that was really fascinating. There was a gentleman, again, you don't know their names. They could be anything. It could be like a woman, who knows? But described himself as a white man, and he said, I'm feminist, I believe in equality for women, but I feel so frustrated by belligerent feminists telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. I just feel like I want to give up. I'm just going to enjoy my male privilege and be done with it. And it was interesting. That post was very polarizing, as you can imagine.
Right.
Both people that responded and also very aggressive people that said, well, you don't know what you're talking about. It's not about you, and da-da-da-da. Yeah. And you talk about the whole scale of pain, that obviously if you're a privileged white male, you may not experience the kind of suffering that someone who is judged for being a minority or being a woman or passed for promotion or being sexually assaulted. That's an alien world to you. And so I think a lot of the responses was from people who looked down on his suffering. His suffering was that I'm trying to do good, and I'm not feeling like my efforts are being appreciated, which is a real form of. It's certainly nowhere near the same league as being sexually assaulted or being denied a promotion or a job.
Maybe he's 30% filled with this.
Exactly. He's trying, and then it was interestingly that the very response was actually kind of validating the very reasons why he feels like, I just want to give up. Why even bother? If I'm just going to get judged and yelled at for trying my best, I may as well just go back to.
And I think that sometimes if you don't value the ability to take in what happened to you, the discomfort, this natural resource of suffering that we all take part in.
Right.
If you don't value it, if you don't feel supported, if you feel that it's unjust or it's wrong or it's not useful to you in any way,
Right.
then there's really no reason why you shouldn't be trying to unload it on somebody else.
Right.
And so it's not surprising to me that people who have suffered a lot but not well are angry.
Yeah.
And trying to perpetrate on other people because I have been cut out of things. I have been wounded.
Right.
And I don't know what to do with this.
Right.
And it doesn't feel fair.
Right.
So I've got this. Here, you take it, white male.
Exactly.
You take it.
Exactly.
And what I want to invite people to do, and it's not that I like racism, but I want us to do our own work.
Right.
And especially those of us who are evolved enough to be able to have felt the suffering,
Right.
to have compassion for suffering or empathy for it or begin to resonate. I really want us to withhold
that judgment.
our passing it on to people.
Right.
I think it's a discipline. It's not easy. And I think that some people are addicted to causing suffering around them. It feels so good to unload some of my suffering. And I've met people who will borrow other people's suffering
And
so that
be
they can give
indignant
it
on
to
their
you.
behalf.
So they can give it to them.
Yes,
Because
yes.
because I've enjoyed. See, there's a relief from suffering that happens when you perpetrate.
Right.
And if I don't have enough of my own, I'm going to grab some. If I don't have enough excuse to perpetrate, I'm going to grab some of your need, and I'm going
Right.
to. And I have to say, you're, to myself more than anyone else. You're not allowed to do that, Diane. You're not allowed.
Lead
to,
by example, right?
To,
I mean, you got to.
to externalize this. You're not allowed to find someone worth killing.
Right.
And then kill them.
Right.
Because that's just doing the thing. That's just sending it in so that this person that I've killed will now be less compassionate to this person.
Right.
And
Passing that pain forward.
and give more suffering into the world. And I think we who are alive right now need to take it to ground as much as we can.
Because I mean, it's one of the biggest genres in film is the vengeance.
Pornography,
Emotional
pornography.
Emotional pornography. That's an interesting way to put it. I was
Yeah.
reading a fascinating review of the film, the Liam Neeson film Taken. I don't know if you probably saw that. You don't watch a lot of movies, I know, but this was a film. He is a former secret operative with like tons of very lethal training, and his daughter was kidnapped. And it was the whole setup. That's the thing is that the film that we want to first emphasize just how precisely horribly bad these people are. So they're worthy of this guy's wrath. He's all of the lethal skills he spent years perfecting. And so when they called him, and this was a line that was repeated in the trailers, and it was like, it was, I don't know who you are, I don't know what you want. If you want money, I don't have any. I can tell you one thing: if you let my daughter go, that'll be the end of it. But if you don't, I spent an entire career learning skills that make me a nightmare for people like you.
Right.
And if you don't let her go, I will find you, I will hunt you down, I will kill you. And the whole film becomes this whole like path of him just exterminating people, every single
and we're allowed
guilty
to feel
party.
good about it because they were allowed to do these things, so now we can feel. And there's a real natural instinct to this guy. I mean, I remember being a 7 or 8 year old kid watching Charles Bronson movies.
Oh, yeah.
And thinking to myself, they're just doing this whole thing so that later he can do terrible things to those people.
Right.
This isn't okay. That's not
But it
okay.
resonates on a very visceral level for
It
people,
does.
right? I mean,
It
that's the thing. That's
absolutely
why
does.
there's a genre. It exists. Porn exists for a reason, because we're titillated by certain things.
Absolutely.
Right? And
absolutely.
if it didn't have any sort of human reaction, no one would spend millions of dollars making these kinds of movies. And these movies make.
In an antidepressant culture, in a culture where we've pathologized being uncomfortable, where we see no reason to suffer.
Right.
So we have a tremendous excess of unprocessed suffering.
And then
we have a need.
have toxic ways of expressing it.
We have a need. Yeah, we have a need. We have a need because no one's ever said to me, Diane, it's okay that you're devastated because you broke your nail.
Right.
It's okay, not only that, but I'm going to sit on the curb next to you and we're going to keen about your broken nail.
Right.
I feel it.
It hurts.
Right.
And it's okay to
Yeah.
hurt. And I think
and
that's.
Instead, we say, do you want something to cry about?
Right.
Is what we say.
Right.
Do you want something worthy? And so we're teaching young people that something, if you're going to suffer, you're going to externalize it.
Right.
And it's going to have to be worthy of that. And then we go looking for the other. We go
seek the
looking for
enemies.
we go looking for, and there's a thing they call the triangle, right? The perpetration triangle. And you have a hero, and you have a victim,
Right.
and then you have a perpetrator. And the perpetrator attacks the victim,
Right.
and then the hero gets to attack the perpetrator.
Right.
But as the hero is attacking the perpetrator, he's making a victim of the perpetrator.
Right.
So he moves over here.
Right. And we don't see that part.
Right. And then we have a new victim,
Right.
a new hero, and a new perpetrator. And we all take our place on this. It's the triangle of suffering, and we go around and around this thing. And I'm saying, bear it. Bear your own suffering.
Right.
Do what Mandela did. Sit there in prison and do the little bit of good you can do and feel it and don't give it to somebody else. And if they've got something to give you, say thank you. I'll use that.
Right.
And this is again, and then I live my life, right?
Right.
And then I leave here and step on a mosquito,
But the point of it is that it's something to look forward to, it's something to aspire to.
Right, it's a target as
Right.
opposed to the target of how can I kill the bad people?
Right.
How can I because we see that now. We see young men in Isla Vista running around with guns. We see this externalized violence and people in their own heads trying to create this pornography of drama where they're bad enough to kill.
Right.
Who can I find who's bad enough to kill? Who's on the out? Yeah.
And that's sufficiently villainous, and we create that villain in our heads, and that's what I worry about. I think is that when we live in a community where we actually know people, we know the imperfect people in our society. They're not going. Whereas if they're just a distant other, it's easier to villainize entire swaths of whoever it is. It's not us.
People who don't look like me or don't speak my language
Worship
or
the same God,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and it goes all the way. I mean,
mm-hmm.
goes in both directions. And then the further level of isolation, I think, is what I feel like are. I don't know if you heard about this. The Google actually, they'll curate your results based upon your search results based upon what their profile of you. If you are naturally predisposed toward believing certain things, politically oriented a certain way, your search results will actually be curated because they want click-throughs. If you search something and it doesn't click through, then they're not going to make their money. So so Google search results are literally different than somebody of different political persuasions, of a different gender, of a different demographic. So we're all being fed what we think is the truth
In a circle.
in a little circle, and we
Oh my
get
goodness, Kai.
reinforcing stories of that fit my narrative, and other people are getting stories that fit their narrative, and we are becoming further and further separated. And it used to be like, oh, everyone has an uncle who's like a hardcore Republican, and a mom who's like a hardcore Democrat, and people in the Communist Party, and da-da-da. And that's okay. We're related. We're not going to agree, but that's okay. And we
Right.
don't have that now. We're becoming
Siloed.
siloed, and that worries
Yeah.
me, I think. So what would you suggest? I mean, in terms of being able to increase the level of, because I have sort of a fatalistic sense of despair about it, frankly. I mean, for me, I look at it and I was like, what do we do?
There's so much despair right now. I sat down with 15 men 3 weeks ago, and
Mm-hmm.
you know what we talked about?
Yeah.
These guys, I mean, every different demographic you can imagine. We talked about this. We talked about how they feel like the young people are being isolated, and there's no community, and there's
Right.
no initiation,
Right.
and exactly what you're saying. So I bring that up because it's on many different demographics
Right.
that we're all sensing this. I wish I had this is how we're going to do it. I know sometimes I give myself hope because I think I'm born at this time
Mm-hmm.
with this technology,
Mm-hmm.
and it's suited me,
Right.
And so the young people who are coming in with this, it'll suit them in some way.
Right.
They'll have an experience with this. And so part of how I stay out of despair is I step back a little bit from what has to be.
Mm-hmm.
From this should be this way or this should be that way. It's going to create something.
Right.
This is in the process of creating something.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what all will come of it. I mean, I think that there will be really beautiful things that come from this. People who are spiraling into the sort of into a full sense of whatever it is they love, and that they wouldn't had they been exposed to many other things. But there's also going to be that potential for more of the triangle.
Right.
And for that, I believe, and I'll say this 1,000 times, that as outside, inside. So what you can do is you can do exactly what you're doing right now. You can connect, and listen and talk and put out those wonderful ideas that you put out, and go and give the talks that you put out about doing little goods,
Small victories.
Yeah.
And I think this is our time. So thank you very much, Diane. This has been phenomenal. I
Oh,
would
thank
like to
you,
thank you,
Kai.
but I have this microphone
I
cord,
know,
so
I know.
I will wrap up. And this is Kai Chang with Q Conversations. We hope you enjoyed the show. There'll be more coming very soon. Thank you.